So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first of the Meridian Mobility Talks. My name's Mike Short. I'm the Chief Scientist, Chief Scientific Advisor in the Department for International Trade. But because of my background in telecoms and as a board member of Meridian Mobility Advisory Board, I thought I'd talk a little bit about Internet on Wheels. My background is in mobile communications mainly, but actually some of the service design aspects for CAV or OLEV and some of the new designs for vehicles and their requirements will require a digital lens. And I don't think it's all just going to come from the smartphone industry or the mobile operators. I think there's a lot of opportunity and room for innovation in this space. And from a trade point of view, it's very important that we grasp that trade to help support exports as well as inward investment. So I've called it Internet on Wheels. I don't want that to be controversial, but the reality is that people's expectations are rising, that they have access to information anywhere, anytime. Now that access to information will take various forms, and I'll summarize some of those areas that I think will be challenging from a business model point of view at the end. So just initially, that's who I am. So the world I come from projects that by 2025, the Internet of Things will be a $1.1 trillion industry. And that's based on the fact that the industry expects there to be 25 billion connected people and devices by 2025. Now they're huge numbers, 25 billion compared to roughly 10 billion today. But that rate of growth in the next 7 years is going to be challenging from a design point of view, from a business model point of view, a cyber point of view, and we need to address this in a more design, systems engineering type way. Meridian Mobility is part of that. Some of the Innovate UK funding is part of that. I'm on the board of Innovate UK in terms of advisory activities. But the reality is we need to think about that systems engineering side very quickly because it's moving fast. I'd also say that some countries have stronger alignment between the telco industry and the automotive industry. If you look to Japan, you could see dialogue between the mobile operators and the automotive sector much more directly than the UK or even Europe. You can see it also in Korea and to some extent in the USA. So in Europe, we have to think about how do we get these two sectors to work together better to deliver some of this value or revenue. It may seem like a big number. That's a whole range of services in the mix. It's not just connectivity revenue. It's services revenue in its broadest sense. And some of those services I'll come on to. If we just take the UK, though, the best source of data and information about the communications industry probably comes from Ofcom. And I've drawn on the Ofcom Communications Market Report. It comes out every August. It's a very comprehensive tome on fixed line, mobile, broadcast, post. It gives you some mobile customer numbers for each of the networks. It shows you the market share. It talks about coverage, talks about capacity to some extent, but it's particularly strong on the data and information it makes available. Some of you may realize that one of the major smartphones recently announced yesterday by Apple was first launched by Apple in 2007. And O2, the company I used to work for, launched the Apple iPhone in the UK and still has significant share. But by 2012, 39% of all users had a smartphone in barely 5 years. By the end of last year, as the 2018 report shows, 78% had a smartphone. So we're living in a connected world. I think all of us probably have our smartphones with us, even though mine is muted because of the microphone. But 78% is a big number, and that's grown very fast in the last 10 years. But what we'd expect is that that 70% reaches close to 100% within 2 to 3 years. What this chart does not show, even though it shows the connectivity of connected televisions and game machines, it doesn't show the connected car story. But as most of you know, eCall, emergency calling, provides connectivity to all new cars. And that's why we're going to see a lot more growth in connectivity to cars as well as these devices that Ofcom are reporting on. So what does that mean to a show like this show? What does it mean? How do you actually think about these issues? Well, if we take some examples of services where the internet is playing a big part, we're already seeing in safety lots of initiatives, not just e-call, but to help with breakdown services. So you can call the breakdown services to where you are. How do we think about the customer care issues in that sense? When it comes to maintenance, how do you get the maintenance alerts, not just on the display, but being notified to the right people? Should your car notify your breakdown company, or should your car notify your garage? Should you be called in? Connectivity is already playing a part in emergencies and breakdown, and will continue to play a much bigger part. If we look in the role of fleet management or car leasing, it's already playing a big part, because some of those leasing companies and fleet management companies are seeing the benefits of connectivity to manage those fleets more readily. So the care of the car and the management of the car, we're seeing examples where connectivity plays a part. In the area to do with logistics and lorries and so on, fuel management has always been important. So thinking about how does connectivity navigate you to the next fuel stop, or perhaps improve the usage of the fuel that you have. Certainly with electric vehicles, we're going to need to both help the range anxiety and find the nearest available vacant charging points. If we think about parking in congested cities, why can't the available parking lots tell you when they are available, rather than you driving around a city to find the parking spaces are blocked? Or if you think about a shared driving world, such as Uber or maybe other equivalent transport services, how do you get to know the car shares or vehicle shares you can use? A lot of the management services will change because of connectivity. There's an interesting example over there about tire management, hence my picture of a tire up there. So the innovation in this space to do with making sure tires are managed and measured is quite useful. But this is providing a lot of data, and some of this data will be very useful for the smart cities of the future. So if we take a top-down view, how are we going to support the smart cities of the future if we don't share this data more readily? It can't just be locked in the car for just the mechanic to use or the car manufacturer to use. It may mean a much bigger data sharing world. If I take the infotainment space, many in the car industry have been quite surprised how the afterfit of the car radio became the prefit of the car radio, and then the CD, and increasingly now we have streaming infotainment that is changing the way things happen quite regularly. Whether it's navigation, the move towards real-time navigation, often provided by the smartphone rather than by the car company. Perhaps areas to do with the weather alerts that might be notified to you ahead of where you're driving, information which may be relevant to your journey, access to hotel information, access to restaurant information, the ability to book ahead. This whole area of infotainment is changing very rapidly. So in some parts of North America and indeed Asia, we're seeing infotainment streaming information to a vehicle that comes over typically a mobile network. Clearly you get navigation information routinely today, but increasingly that range of information may be streamed to and from the car for all sorts of reasons. And lastly, I think the whole area of interactive services is changing. The ability to think about healthy drivers. How can you think about making sure that the sensors around the wheel or the conditions in the car go hand in hand with healthy driving? Can you use that for real-time monitoring appropriate behavior and so on? Already there are some examples here. Lightfoot is one example that is already doing some work to do with the driver experience and the loyalty that may go with good driving behavior. But you can start to imagine other solutions in the healthy driving area, and in the UK as well as other countries with an aging population, that will become more important. It's not just about car sharing or C-Cab or OLEV, it's also about healthy driving for everybody. Also, as we move towards things like driverless cars, I was involved with the Greenwich-based Gateway project when I was at O2, and we started to think about what would people do if they didn't have to drive. They would want to be both entertained, but possibly also to work, possibly to do all sorts of things you might not imagine in the car when you don't have to concentrate on the driving. But it certainly also means that the insurance might be a different type of class for driverless cars. But working within the car when it's driverless is certainly something that the train company have woken up to and some of the airlines have woken up to. Is it time that the car industry also adapts to that? Lastly, some of the health of the individuals in the car. It's not just about sensors, it might also be about the monitoring of the various conditions of the road as well as the car. We might start to think about how to minimize stress. There are all sorts of techniques coming. Now, this is not just a world of apps. You know, apps have grown through the roof in the smartphone world. This is more about solutions and services. So how can we design solutions and services without an architecture that might be relevant to this? Clearly, we might think about design architectures or electrical architectures, but we might need some architectures. It's very important to have end-to-end design thinking. So before I take any questions at the end, I think this leads to 5 major conclusions. From an international point of view, as CSA, I want to make sure the collaboration works across the sectors for export and inward investment. The collaboration in this cross-sector activity we're already seeing in other countries, but I want to make sure it works well, whether it be event-based, mission-based, innovation-based, but also export and inward investment-based. Some of those car companies working with telcos in Japan and Korea and, dare I say it, in the USA are already interested in the advanced UK market. So we need to make sure we can capture some of that collaboration for inward investment. I think the second implication here is business models are going to change. And we've seen the changes in the book distribution business with Amazon. What's going to happen if Amazon enter the car business? Will they change the way in which provisioning of cars is done? Will they change the distribution networks to do with services as well as the car itself? What will happen if other internet players come into this world to start to offer new services? The business models will change. One early example of that is we already see pay-as-you-go driving insurance, where the monitoring of the miles might relate to an insurance policy. In the driverless car arena, insurance is likely to move from driver-based insurance to asset-based insurance. We already see those business model changes. If health comes into this, we might see health-led insurance schemes as well, which might look at the risk profile of healthy drivers, unhealthy conditions, smart cities, and so on. So the second ramification of this is that the business models are going to change. The third thing that's going to change is the pace of design is going to change. If you're going to get from roughly 10 billion connected people and devices to 25 billion within the next 7 years, the pace of systems design is going to change very rapidly. Now that's going to introduce some risks. We need to minimize the risks. I was pleased to see earlier on one of the stands the reference to digital resilience, which includes cybersecurity. So making sure this is not a big brother world or a world open to hacking, but we need to think about digital resilience. That will include coverage. Does the network have the coverage? I know we're at Millbrook, so it's hardly a 5G advanced location today. It may not be a very advanced 4G location today either, but we need to think about network coverage as part of digital resilience. I think lastly, we need to think about some of the areas to do with competition. And this is my fear. If we don't collaborate better, I think some of the services that we may wish to offer in this sort of world may be provided for us by others. From a UK point of view, we have some real strengths in this area, but I think we need to be ready for this competitive wave of new services to deliver it from the UK as well as in collaboration with others internationally. 25 billion may be a huge connectivity number, and it's not all connected cars in that number, but the car itself will have a key part. But the number of smartphones every year shipped is already much bigger than the number of PCs, cars and TVs shipped every year. It's roughly 2 billion a year. 2 billion a year is a big number. It's therefore hard to keep up with the pace of innovation in that space. But I'm afraid this pace of innovation is coming into the car industry, and we're moving into a world of digital cars and digital lorries and digital fleets. So how do we deal with it? We need to address these challenges now and get on with it. Are there any questions, either in my capacity as a Meridian Mobility board member, or as Chief Scientist in International Trade, or possibly in my capacity as a telecoms guru? Would anybody like to disagree with my thesis about Internet on wheels? Was that a yes, sir?
maybe as a combination of your chief scientific advisor and the telecoms, how does the UK compare internationally to its telecoms provision and its innovation?
The UK has been a leader in telecoms and digital for many years. There are clearly some things we can still do better, and we need to learn from other countries. But in the telco world, we would typically look to Northeast Asia as a regular exemplar, which is why I know a bit about how the mobile players and the automotive players work in Japan and Korea with each other. We'd also regularly look to the big markets like China and USA, because from a scale point of view, there are some cost benefits in working at scale. In addition to that, in Europe, we look to the Nordic countries, particularly Scandinavia, the Scandinavian countries, because they've traditionally been very advanced in terms of the technology of telecoms networks. But for digital services, we're probably second only to USA. So the digital services, including insurance and entertainment and areas like breakdown services, we are a leader, a world leader. And that's why I'm really emphasizing the services today, because I think as a government and as an industry, we need to do more to promote that in an automotive environment. We're also a services economy as well, so it's understandable that our leadership should be portrayed in that sense.
As you highlighted, there's some big players out there that would readily step into the UK and provide these sort of services to us, like the likes of Google, Apple, and Amazon with their Amazon Web Servers. Are you aware of any work that they're doing at the moment that they're already in development with this sort of platform?
Yes, already, if one looks at Tesla, and you can see some of the software provisioning that's being done by Tesla, that's an early example of how they're providing software updates to and from the car. Certainly in parts of Asia, some of the big Japanese and Korean companies are looking at more of the services set in a slightly different way to the way we describe it in the UK. So thinking about insurance, thinking about navigation, thinking about streaming entertainment, some of the examples I've already covered. Do they all have sophisticated internet-ready platforms today? No. Are they getting there? Yes. Certainly when you look to the USA, a lot of the cloud computing arrangements for the big internet companies are gearing up towards the automotive sector, including maintenance. It was a bit of a shock perhaps when Amazon got involved with pharmacy and also Whole Foods recently. But why shouldn't they move into automotive as well? We can see also interest from some of the advertising-led internet companies, including Google, because they like the idea of reaching customers through mobile, but also wherever they are. So I would expect others to play a part. Are they all ready? No, but in some of the services, there are some good examples out there already. Okay, thank you very much for coming here first thing in the morning on day 2. Thank you.